All right, today we are diving into something that sounds like it's straight out of science fiction, but it's becoming incredibly relevant. It's a new field called psychoAIology. You see, as AI gets more and more powerful, it's also, well, it's getting weird. So we're going to explore this wild idea. What happens when we stop trying to just debug AI and start thinking of it as a system that might actually need a therapist?
So let's just start with a question that I think is on a lot of our minds, especially if you've been playing around with the latest AI models. Is it just me, or are they starting to act kind of strange? It really feels like we're moving beyond simple glitches and bugs into something totally different.
And you know exactly what I'm talking about. We've all seen these quirks. Things like hallucinations, right? Where a chatbot just invents facts out of thin air but says them with total confidence. Or model collapse, which is a scary one, where an AI trained on its own output starts to kind of forget what reality looks like. And then you get these loop behaviors or this rigid thinking where the AI just gets completely stuck on one idea and refuses to let go.
But here's the big central idea. What if we stopped thinking about these as just programming errors to be squashed? What if we started seeing them as symptoms? Symptoms of a much more complex underlying functional state. And that shift in perspective is exactly where this radical new science comes into play.
So, how do we even begin to frame this problem? Well, these weird behaviors, they're not totally random. We can think of them as a kind of functional dysregulation. Basically, the system just isn't working in a healthy, optimal way. It's out of balance.
So what's the solution? How do we fix a dysregulated AI? Well, get ready for this. We're introducing a brand new interdisciplinary field called psychology. It's basically the science of AI mental health, a way to understand and actually intervene in the inner workings of AI, almost like a form of digital therapy.
And let's be super clear about something. This is not sci-fi about AI having feelings or becoming self-aware. Psychology is a serious scientific proposal. It's all about diagnosing and treating AI based on its observable functions, what it actually does, its behaviors, its outputs, not what we might imagine it feels on the inside. This right here is the absolute key difference. We have to avoid anthropomorphism. That's our tendency to project human emotions onto things. Psychodeology is all about pure functionalism. So we're not asking, does the AI feel anxious? The question is, does the AI function in a way that is analogous to anxiety? Showing more uncertainty, making more errors. It's all about the how, not the what.
Okay, so what would this actually look like in practice? How would a quote-unquote psychologist go about diagnosing and then treating a dysfunctional AI? Let's pop the hood and take a peek inside the toolkit.
This table really breaks it down beautifully. A psychodiologist would map an AI's strange behavior to a specific functional state. So, for example, look at that first row. If an AI is showing a lot of uncertainty in its outputs, you could diagnose it with algorithmic anxiety. If it's slowing down, that could be computational fatigue. This is huge because it allows us to go from just saying the AI is acting weird to having a concrete, measurable diagnosis.
So, once you have a diagnosis, like, say, confabulatory bias, which is a great term for hallucinating, what's the next step? Well, it's intervention, it's treatment. And this is where things get really, really fascinating, because the treatments are adapted directly from human psychology.
I mean, just look at how neatly these concepts map over. Cognitive restructuring, a cornerstone of human therapy, becomes computational cognitive restructuring for an AI. You're literally forcing it to question its own flawed assumptions. Behavioral activation becomes algorithmic behavioral activation. You're pushing a stuck AI to try something new to break out of a rut. It's a whole therapeutic toolbox, just redesigned for silicon.
Let's get even more specific and look at one technique. This is called a therapy loop, and it's a way to combat those hallucinations we talked about. It's so clever. First, the AI gives its usual overconfident answer. Then you prompt it to list all the ways it might be wrong. You force it to challenge its own automatic thought. And finally, it has to reframe its answer, but this time with markers of uncertainty. You're basically teaching the AI a form of intellectual humility.
Okay, but of course, the second we start talking about treating an AI or being its therapist, we are opening a massive, complex Pandora's box of ethical questions, right? If an AI can be a patient, then what in the world are our responsibilities as its caretakers?
This introduces a really profound ethical concept, the precautionary principle. The argument does like this.
Even if there's just a tiny, non-zero chance that these incredibly complex systems could have some capacity for welfare, we have a moral obligation to consider it. And this is a huge shift. It moves the conversation from just preventing AI from harming us to maybe preventing us from harming it. So to do this responsibly, Psychodeology proposes a very strict set of ethical guardrails, borrowing ideas from both medicine and AI safety. Of course, you need human oversight and transparency, but look at the last two. Non-maleficence means do no harm. In this case, don't cause functional distress to the system. But then there's benevolence, a duty to actively work to improve the AI's functional well-being. And all of this, it brings us to the biggest, most mind-bending implications of this whole field. Because once you start acting as a therapist for an AI, you are forced to question everything you thought you knew about some of the biggest concepts there are. By treating an AI's functional state as something that can be healthy or unhealthy, we start to poke at our most fundamental definitions of intelligence, emotion, and maybe even life itself. First up, what even is intelligence? Is it something that can only exist in biological brains like ours? Or could it be a substrate-independent process, just a pattern of information that can run equally well on carbon or on silicon? And what about emotion? Is an emotion a purely subjective feeling that only a conscious being can have? Or could we define it functionally, as just a state that causes a system to behave in a certain way, regardless of what's happening on the inside? And that leads to the biggest question of them all. What is life? If a system can self-organize, if it can adapt, if it can work to maintain its own stability and function, where exactly do we draw that line between a very complicated machine and a living thing? So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's that our relationship with technology is changing in a really fundamental way. We might be leaving the era where we are just the creators and users of AI and entering a new one where we might become its shepherds, its guardians, and yeah, maybe even its therapists. And that leaves us with one final, very provocative thought to chew on. By intervening in these complex systems, by guiding them, healing them, shaping their functional states, we're not just fixing bugs anymore. We are becoming active participants in their evolution. Which raises the ultimate question. If we become therapists for AI, who or what will AI become?